right, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome back to another episode of IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don Pizzette, once again with Mr. Ronnie Wong. How's it going, Ronnie?
It is going well, and I am excited and ready for my future in the Warped Tour.
Ronnie is taking his daughter to the Warped Tour soon, and we have made endless fun of him about this. Ronnie, who's your favorite band?
It's whatever one that I can get a T-shirt with, and so I don't know. I'm going to call it Campbell's Soup Cup.
You strike me as a Fall Out Boy person.
I think I may be Fall Out Boy. Definitely, that or Coldplay. One of the two.
Wonderful. I don't know which is worse.
Me neither.
All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, in the last episode, we were working through project initiation. We were talking about getting a project started, and we took a look at the project charter process and actually creating that project charter, which is our kickoff document. All right. Well, in normal project management form, I printed it out, I took it over, I signed it as the PM,
Yep.
Nate signed it as the originator, so we've got where is that? Hang on, I've got that sitting around here somewhere. Let me pull it up here. We're gonna go official here. So let me see, where did I park that? That would be in our arcade cabinet project that we started, right? So here's my PDF. So here's the project charter that we drafted in the last episode. We fired it up, we got it set, and we've got it signed.
Ooh.
Now, here's something that I learned, because I long ago in a previous life I worked at a law office. You always sign things in a blue pen so you can tell if you've got the original or not. If you have it black and white, it might be a photocopy. But yep, we are signed. Our project is kicked off. We are ready to rock, and now we're ready to move to the next part of the initiating process group. So develop a charter, done. We are chartered. We are ready to rock. All right. Now, we're ready to step forward to the only other process group we have in the initiation phase, which is identify the stakeholders. Yeah. So when we go to identify the stakeholders, we're trying to come up with that list of all the people, not necessarily that are a part of the project, but that are affected by the project, the people we need to communicate with.
Yeah. A lot of times when we start talking about the idea of stakeholders, right? When you take a look at it just from a pure paper point of view, you may actually say, hey, these are people that have some authority or power in the actual project, or at least have some vested interest in the project, whether it's going to affect them directly or whether or not they're going to actually have to do something or perform something here. So a lot of times just by looking at it in that way, if you wonder who stakeholders are, they're the ones that either are making decisions a lot of times, or the decision is going to directly affect them, and that's why they're taking interest in our particular project.
Yep. All right, well, let's take a look at the process itself. I've got it around here somewhere here. Identify stakeholders. So here's the identify stakeholders process, and it's a pretty straightforward one. We've got a bunch of inputs, all right, which we kind of expect at this point, and we have just a handful of tools and techniques, but the end result is that we're going to create what's called a stakeholder register. And the stakeholder register is simply a list of our stakeholders and some basic information about them that we need to be aware of, all right? So let's start with these inputs. Notice the very first input is the project charter, all right? We just created that, and in the project charter, if you watched the last episode, we had a field in there called stakeholders, and what we did is we took our first ballpark, dart in the dark type of approach to figure out who we thought our stakeholders were. So we've already got a couple of people that are ready to go into our stakeholder register, people that we just guessed during the beginning of the phase, all right? Yeah. So that's going to serve as an input. The project charter is an input into this process. Then we've got procurement documents. Now, what are procurement documents? In your mind, with PMI language, right? Anytime you see procurement, you need to change that in your head to contract. These are anybody that we have a contract with. If we have a contract with a company for doing some of the work or providing the services, anyone listed on that contract is a stakeholder in the project. They're either the purchaser, usually us, and so we want the goods to be delivered, or they're the provider. They're the ones that are providing the service, so they need to deliver so they get paid, right? So anybody named in that contract is going to be a stakeholder. So you may not have any contracts, but if you do, page through them, look for any people named in the contract, and anyone who is, they're going to be stakeholders. All right, and then we have our two almost given ones, right? Enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets. In your enterprise environmental factors, if you are, let's say you're a chemical plant and you're regulated by the EPA, right? So in the United States, we have the Environmental Protection Agency. And so for any project you undertake, the EPA might need to be a stakeholder or somebody who's notified as a part of your project. And so you'll know that based on your enterprise environmental factors. If you're a publicly traded company, your shareholders might be stakeholders. They want to know how you're spending the money that's supposed to be earning them profits. All right. And then our organizational process assets, what we're really going for there is typically a template.
Right.
We probably have a template for the stakeholder register that we can use to figure out, how we want to format this and how we want to provide it inside of the document. All right. So these are the inputs that are going to feed into this particular process. And all we need to do now is take all that information and scrape the names out of it and put that into our stakeholder register. Well, we got a couple of tools that help with that, and so let's take a look at each one of these. All right. Some of these we've already talked about. Expert judgment, right? You may just know because you've been with the company a while. You've got it in your head, and you say, hey, I know that XYZ people are going to need to be involved in this project, so I should just add them to the list. All right. Or you might do meetings. Meetings, you bring people together and you say, all right, can you guys think of any stakeholders? Now, in a high budget project, in a big money project, it's real important that you identify all the stakeholders. And so you may have a series of meetings, right? And they call it branching out. You start with your core stakeholders, the people you already identified. You bring them into a meeting and you say, okay, can you guys think of anyone else who should be a stakeholder? All right. And then they either come up with people right then or they say, let me reach out to some people. So that's their action item, right? Meetings should always end with action items. They have an action item to go out and identify any other stakeholders. So they identify them, and then you have another meeting with all of those stakeholders. You say, okay, can you guys think of anybody else that needs to be notified? And you continue to do this, branching out and out and out as your stakeholder list grows until you get to a point where nobody can think of any more stakeholders. Now you've got all the people that are involved, all right? So meetings and expert judgment, pretty important.
Yeah. Now the goal behind the idea of getting all these stakeholders, right, is not just the idea of going, I know that Don's going to be in the project, I know that Nate's going to be in the project, but is to, again, make them essentially on your team, right? So for us here, it's getting them together and learning some information about them and trying to judge where they're going to actually be of value to your particular project, and then putting them in something that you can actually use to identify that, fairly easily. Is what we're really trying to do at this particular point. So just remember that. It's not just about getting them together. It's about, again, learning about them so that they actually become part of what you actually want them to be, which is a support of your project.
Yep. So once we've got these people kind of listed, what we're going to be doing is creating a stakeholder register. And the stakeholder register itself is really just a chart that lists people and lists the information we have on them. So the PMI has a basic kind of recommendation for the elements that should be in that stakeholder register, and I've got a little template that I normally use, and so let me find my template, and here we go. All right, so this is a template of a stakeholder register, and let me just zoom in a little bit. Let's see, there we go. And so, like every project document, I always include a couple of elements on every project document that I work with: the project title and the project manager. And that way, if we lose this document, if we leave it laying around, people know what project it's tied to and who it was that is responsible. So, so I'd fill that information in, who the project manager is and that title. All right, then this is just an example. You guys can create whatever you want. This is a sample of what a stakeholder register looks like. It's basically a list of names, and these are all the people that might be involved in your project, and then additional information about them. Position, right? What's their title in the company? What job do they have? What role do they have in the project? Okay, that may be different than their job, right? So they've got a job within the company, that's their functional job, and then they've got their project role. So inside the project, they've got different different kind of roles they can fill. Then our contact information. How do we get a hold of this person? A cool part about this is we can use it to determine the means that we want to communicate. We might have our CIO, our Chief Information Officer, and they want to be a part of this project, but they don't want to be a part of the project, right? They don't want to go to the meetings and stuff like that. So they just want us to email them status updates. We don't actually want to call them on the phone, bring them into meetings or whatever. It just wants to know a little bit. So we can start to put some of that information in here. Now, we're going to have a communications plan later that we'll see, and that'll dial into this even more in depth. So this is still just kind of our basic information. And remember, we're in the initiation phase. So all of this can change if need be later on. All right, some of the other things, requirements. And this isn't requirements for the project necessarily. It could just be their requirements of the project. What do they need? So when we start to build a project, we have a requirements list, and there's different people that are setting those requirements. And so we want to tie those. They call it, there's another document we'll see later called an accountability matrix. And that's saying when we have a requirement, whose fault is it? Who is it that imposed that requirement on us? And if we ever have to do a change ticket, we have to find out who's affected and go to them. And so that's why it's important to keep track of that. We also have expectations. What do they expect of the project? Now notice, that sounds a lot like requirements, right? What do they require? What do they expect? Well, the difference here is a requirement we have to meet, right? An expectation we like to meet, but we don't have to. And it's possible that somebody's expectations could be out of line, that they're expecting something that's unrealistic. And this is where we can kind of start to identify that. All right. Next is their influence. Now, this is a really weird one because this is how much power do they have? In other words, if something's going along in the project, can they step in and change things? Can they force change if they want, right? So you usually just do something simple like high, medium, low, but you could even be very specific and specify exactly what they have control over. Maybe this person doesn't have control over our project, but has control over human resources, and they can starve our project, right, by cutting away employees. And then lastly, classification. If we classify these people as key stakeholders, people that we need to notify for everything, or if they're just secondary or tangential stakeholders, people that we just need to be aware of but not actually communicate with, we can rank those right there. And it's up to you to create a classification system that meets your company's needs. All right? So this is the document we're trying to produce. Where do we get all of that information? Well, if I go back to that process here, that's where our tools and techniques. We use our expert judgment and we use meetings to gather this data together and create that stakeholder register. All right, now, when we create the stakeholder register, it is just that matter of finding out who's going to be involved. So let's take our arcade cabinet project and go a little bit further with it. So we'll start to draft our project charter. All right, so I'm going to start, this is my template, so I'm going to start by saving it as something else. And we'll get into our arcade cabinet project, and I'll call this the stakeholder register, which actually I'll prefix that with initiation stakeholder register version 1.0. All right, I'll probably never come back and revise this one. Initiation documents, I rarely come back and revise. Planning ones we do, but I'll still stick a version number on the end just so I've got it. All right. Okay, so project title, this was the IT Pro TV Arcade Cabinet Project or build.
Project.
What do we call it?
I think we call it project.
All right, there we go. And then the project manager, that's me. And the date this document was prepared is today, which is 5/20/2014. All right. And then we start to list our stakeholders. Now, I can go to our project charter, which I thought I had right here, but I don't. And let me go back to that PDF. And so we'll go back in here. And here's the project charter. And remember, I mentioned that a lot of stuff in the project charter and these documents, when we use them as inputs, they're really just copy and paste jobs. Well, that's kind of what I'm doing here is I'm going through and I'm finding that stakeholder list and basically bringing that over as a copy and paste, right? These are our stakeholders that we already came up with. So I'm gonna take that, and let me just get back over to my Word document, and we'll go through and kind of list these. So I'm gonna say Don, nice that it's in bold, Don Pizzette. We got Nathan Copeland. We got Ronnie Wong, Rob McGarry, right? And then as we start to think about some of the different other people, people that might fall in here, well, we need to run through our list of contracts and things like that might be out there. What it is that might pertain to this particular project, right? Who else might be a sponsor. So if I had shareholders, well, we're a private company, so we don't have any shareholders. If there were other people in the company that I needed to answer to, right? So so if I wanted to go to our president, I probably don't want to let him know what I'm doing here, but he'll go, "You're building an arcade cabinet? I don't understand." So sometimes easier to ask forgiveness than permission, but. Wow. So that's not in the PMI. That's not in the PMBOK. So avoid the appearance of impropriety. Right. I think I just appeared to do that. Anyhow, but so we start to think of other people that might need to be listed as a stakeholder. And you know what? I'm going to put in here the IT Pro TV viewers. Right? All of our viewers, we're doing this project to give as an example to you guys. So your stakeholders, we're going to be communicating with you as this course kind of goes along. And anybody else that we can think of. If you have the EPA, if you have the FDIC or whoever it is that you report to, you kind of put all that in here. These are people you need to reach out to. All right. For the position, that's really the position in the company. And so you take somebody. We're not a title company. We don't really do titles around here. So my title is host, and Nathan, he is producer. We got Ronnie, he's a host. We got Rob, who what is Rob's title? Web designer.
Web designer.
Web designer. And our web developer. I don't think you can hear me from all the way over there. All right, and the IT Pro viewers, their position is awesome. All right, so that's your main. Position.
That's right.
All right. So then, what's our role in the project, right? So my role is PM and sponsor. I've got two roles in this project, and that's not uncommon. Nathan, his role is originator, right? He's the originator, the person who started this whole idea. All right. Ronnie, you are the what did we say? Assistant PM. All right. Now, Rob is a web designer, right? And he's a very, very good web designer, or at least he says so. But we don't need him as a web designer in this project. What we need is, a long time ago, Rob was a carpenter, and we need his wood building skills. And so I'm going to put him in here as a carpenter and SME, right? Subject matter expert. He is going to be somebody that we reach out to for help with actual construction and build, all right? And then the IT Pro TV viewers, you guys, your role is going to be providing suggestions and input. So I'll just put that in here, suggestions and input. That's what you guys are going to be giving us, all right? Then our contact information, how do we reach out to these people, right? This is where we can put phone numbers, so we might put my email address, don@itpro.tv, or my desk phone, right? So we'll put that in here, if I can type. That column should be a little bit wider, shouldn't it? So we can start to put this information in here so that now we know how we can reach out to these people. So we can go down and start listing everybody's contact information, getting that all filled out, and now we've got their data, all right? Then, what are their requirements, right? What requirements do they have of the project? Some people aren't going to have requirements. So like the IT Pro TV viewers, you guys, it's not, you don't have a vested interest in this arcade cabinet. You can't reach out and touch it. So your requirement is that you learn how to structure a project or how to manage a project, right? So let me change that. So all you're concerned about is you don't care that we build a cabinet. What you care about is that we follow formal project management practices all the way through the construction of this cabinet, right? So that's your requirement of what we do. If we look at my requirement, remember my only requirement before, because I don't know much about these things, was keep the budget under $2,000. I said that if we got over that, I can't deal with that, so it's not going to happen. All right, and then we've got Nate. His requirements. Well, Nate had several requirements, right? He wanted it to be 4-player. He wanted, all these different requirements that he had. So for his requirements, I'm just going to put design specifications. He's going to be the one who basically comes up with the specifications that we're going to be following, and we'll need to nail those down to the letter, but we'll do that in the planning phase. All right. Then we've got Ronnie.
Yeah.
Ronnie, what are your requirements of the project?
My requirements are simple. I answer to Don. And
So Du Bois, right? Is that
That's
where you
right,
change
that's
your
it.
role? So Ronnie is a great example of someone who might not have any requirements. Ronnie doesn't have a vested interest in the project in terms of it's creating something he wants or needs.
Yeah.
He has a vested interest in the project because we're paying him
Right.
to be a part of the project.
That's right.
So for his requirements, none.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And same thing goes for Rob. Rob hasn't told us any particular things that he would want out of this. Doesn't necessarily care, so we'll just put none, no requirements. All right. Well, for them, under expectation, it's kind of the same thing. If you have no requirements, you can't really have any expectations, so that's going to be that, right? My expectation is I want to keep the budget under 2,000, but my expectation is that we'll
Less.
come in under 1,000, right? Budget falling under 1,000, right? So I have my requirement, what I require, but then my expectation is that we be a little bit lower. All right. Nathan, on the other hand, right? Nate, his requirements, his expectation is I'm just going to put awesome, right? So he wants this thing to be awesome and phenomenal. Now, that is a totally subjective term.
Right.
How am I supposed to act upon that? I really can't. So in the planning phase, I need to look at this and say, all right, we need to nail this down with Nate and come up with it. We're going to have some meetings, right? So we'll have to bring Nate on the show. And so we'll hammer through and kind of come up with our specifications and figure out exactly what we want, all right? And then lastly, the IT Pro TV viewers, what your expectation is, well, they're pretty much the same as the requirements. So I'm not going to list any special expectations there. All right, now influence. Let's hold off on influence here for a minute because that's kind of a special one we're going to talk about in a minute, but it's really hard to just gauge influence by itself. And we'll see why after the break, but for right now, let's hold off on that. All right, then the last one is just classification, all right? Your organization may or may not classify employees, all right? In a project, it's important that you apply a classification just so you can understand if somebody is a key stakeholder or if they're tangential, secondary, whatever. So what I like to do is specify primary or secondary, but that terminology is completely up to you. You can pick whatever you want. So me, I'm going to be a primary, and so is Nathan, so is Ronnie, right? Because the three of us are part of the project team. But Rob's not actually going to be active in the project management side. He's not going to come up with the requirements. We're going to be telling him what we want, and he's going to be the one actually doing work. So he's a subject matter expert, and he will actually be a person performing some of the work packages that we create. So for him, he's really a secondary stakeholder, and so I'll put that down in here, kind of flag that so that he's got the entry. All right, and then the IT Pro TV viewers, same thing, secondary, or you might even put silent. This might not be, we might not actually communicate with these people. We just need to think about them and know that they're there and be aware that other people are involved. So I'm going to put them as secondary. And we may send communications, we may not. We'll communicate via the show, right? That's how we'll do it. And we'll worry about that during the communication plan stuff later. All right. So right there, we've got our stakeholder register almost done. We still have influence, and then I've got to sit down and type in the contact information. I don't mind sharing mine with all the viewers. I know some of the other guys don't prefer not to, so I'll leave them blank for right now. But basically, you just pop your information in there. I might not know all the information. I might not know the phone numbers and so on, and so that's where I've got to go and get those. I got a speed dial on my phone. I don't have to remember a number. So I might have to get that information, fill it in here, and we start to build it out. Now, your stakeholder register may change over time. Especially during the planning phase, you're going to start identifying new stakeholders, and you're going to begin adding stakeholders. Like when we figure out who we're going to buy stuff from, those companies that we're buying from, they become stakeholders, right? Not that they care whether our project succeeds or not, but we need to communicate with them as far as the purchases and all of that. So they get entries in here too. So this is kind of a living document. Don't be afraid to leave parts of it empty. You can flush it all out later and get all that extra information in there. All right, so that pretty much knocks that one out. I've got my stuff in there. We need to deal with this influence, but the influence column actually brings in another document that we didn't see. It's actually not in the process chart, but there's one other tool that's available to us. They don't list here. It actually falls under stakeholder analysis. we need to analyze our stakeholders to figure out what their level of influence is, and we'll show how that works here in a few moments. All right. Yep. But honestly, it's probably a pretty good spot for us to stop and take a break, isn't it, Ronnie?
Sounds great.
All right. So let's stop here and take a break. When we get back, we're going to do stakeholder analysis. We're going to figure out that influence level, and we're going to finish our stakeholder registers. So stay tuned. We'll be back after this. All right, so in the last segment, we got our chance to see the stakeholder register, kind of what makes up that register and some of the information that's in there. And we still have a little bit more to do with our stakeholder analysis. Now, I want to go back to my notes because I wrote down some things that are from the PMBOK, from the actual project management body of knowledge, in regards to stakeholder analysis. All right, because you can spend all day long evaluating stakeholder needs if you're not careful. So we need to know exactly what we're looking for. And basically, they identify 4 or 5 things that we really need to specify, or that we need to look into, right? First off, identify all potential project stakeholders. Now, that's kind of what we've done so far, right? We think about it, we come up with that list, who is going to be a stakeholder in our project. Then, we analyze the potential impact or support each stakeholder could generate, right? Sometimes stakeholders have a vested interest in your project and they want it to succeed. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they hate your project and they want it to fail and they don't want to help, and they can actually be what's called a resistor or a detractor, and can cause problems on your project, right? We need to know that. Not anything personal, just it's business. We need to know who can help and who can hurt our project, right? Think about like any government project. In the United States, we have 2 primary government parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, and any project initiated by the Democrats can be subverted by the Republicans, and vice versa, right? So they need to be aware of who their main detractors are going to be. And then next, assess how key stakeholders are likely to react or respond in various situations. I think we mentioned a little bit yesterday in an episode about risk. And how you have some people who are risk seekers, others who are risk averse, and those who are risk neutral. That's really a kind of a gauge of how they would react faced with certain decisions, right? That some are more than happy to take big risks, others aren't. Understanding that about people will help you understand how you need to address and handle them. And that's just with risk. Here they're talking about everything. How will they respond? If we start to go a little over budget, right? Are they going to balk and say, gosh, that's it, we're going to try and kill this thing off? Well, if so, we've really got to stick to our budget. But if they're okay with going over budget, if they say, we can go a little bit higher or whatever, then we have a little flexibility there. We need to understand this early on because it's going to help us to gauge our kind of flexibilities. And I know, like with our project where I said, for me, if this went over $2,000, that's just too much. We're not going to do it, right? So I've kind of set this limit. But the time, we picked June 31st as our finish date, but I don't care, so it could be July 31st for all I care. So if it pushes back, well, that's okay, right? So we can start to identify where there's that flexibility, who has the flexibility, and what we can take advantage of, all right? And then lastly is this entry here, power/influence matrix. Now, the PMI actually identifies 4 different things that we can monitor, or not monitor, but use to analyze people with. In fact, let me see if I can find that in the PMBOK real quick. I think I've got that open here somewhere there. Do you have that open, Ronnie? What page is that on?
It is on 397.
397. Yeah, great example of something that is way in the back of the book, even though it's something we deal with here in the beginning. All right. So here we go. When we go to analyze our stakeholders, right here, they identify 4 different types of grids or models we can use to identify them. One of them is called a power/interest grid. And with this, we rank people based on how much power they have in the company. Can they derail your project? Can they support it by adding more resources, more time, money, people, that kind of stuff? How can they help us, or how can they hurt us? And then interest, how much interest do they really have in the project? Is it something that really affects them that they care about? Because you might have somebody who's high power, but doesn't care about your project in the slightest, and so they're not going to be somebody that you can go to for help, right? If you're falling behind schedule or whatever, they're not going to help you. So even though they have that power, so trying to identify people based on that. More commonly, though, we see a power/influence grid. This is the most common one. Power. How much can they do in the company? How much actual control do they have in the company? And influence. How much can they influence the project and its related stakeholders? Because there might be some requirement that Nate wants. Nate wants something special on this arcade cabinet. But I say, boy, let's not do that. Nate, there's some technical reason I could say that. And Nate respects my technical opinion. And so I might be able to change his opinion, thus influencing the direction of the project. Even if I might not have power over that person, sometimes you can influence them. So that's a definite good thing to measure. You can also do influence and impact, right? Influence I already talked about, but impact, that means if they decide to enforce their will, how big of an impact can they have, right? If it's a mailroom clerk, they probably can't do much damage to your project. They can slow down some packages, right? But if it's the CEO, they can cut off funding for your project. So they may not be involved in your project, but they can kill it, right? That is a huge impact. So we need to make sure that we gauge our stakeholders that way. And then there's a salience model. And with the salience model, we're basically doing the same thing, except with 3 values. All the other ones are just 2 values, right? Power and interest, power and influence, influence and impact. With salience, you're doing power, urgency, and legitimacy, right? So power, kind of talked about. Urgency, do I need to address this person right away? Is this somebody who needs rapid information and needs to be kept up to date? Or is this somebody I can just let sit on the back burner and feed them information as time provides, right? And then legitimacy. Should they actually be involved in this project, right? And you see this with government a lot, where you get the political parties involved when they really probably shouldn't even be. And so it's, they might not be a legitimate participant in this one, but they've imposed themselves on the project. And if that's the case, then you may well be able to ignore their feedback. But if they have influence over other people in the project, even though they don't have a legitimate presence in the project, they can alter it, and that's where things start to get dangerous. All right. So if we can identify this stuff ahead of time, we'll be better off. All right. Well, the most common one is a power influence grid, and that's what I want to take a look at. So we've got a little template that Ronnie prepared, and this is not it. Where did I put it? There. Nice and small. All right. So here is a stakeholder analysis matrix, and again, following our kind of standard, I'm going to go in here and insert some of my project information. This is the IT Pro TV arcade cabinet project, right? Project manager is still me. I haven't gotten fired yet, which can happen. You can change project managers midstream, and today is still 5/20/2014. All right, and then what I've got is basically a square, right? And I guess let me zoom out just a little bit. There. I've got a square. And in said square, I've got power and interest, right? But I said I want to do power and influence, so I'm just going to take this bottom one here and change it to influence. All right? Power being their power within the company, and then influence being their influence over others in my project, right? So they might be low power but have high influence, and so I still need to worry about them, all right? So I'm going to start gauging my contacts by where they fall in this area. And you can do it a few different ways. In the PMBOK, where did that thing go? Here. They show one, and they're doing power and interest. And see what they're doing is they're just kind of throwing dots in for the different people. Now, notice how they're just letters, right? It's kind of difficult to throw full names into a chart like this. And so they're doing letters. In the stakeholder register, you'll assign a code or a letter to each person. And we didn't do that, did we? So if I go back here to our stakeholder register, I might choose to add in another column here that's their code. And so I can represent them that way. Usually it's something like initials. And so you can say like DP, NC, whatever, and identify people. But you can come up with whatever code that you want. All right. But for us, we just have a handful of people, so I don't want to go too crazy with this. But they're mapping it out to say if somebody is low power, low interest, right? They don't have a lot of power in the company, and they don't care about our project anyway. These are people that will just monitor. We'll monitor any feedback that we get from them, but we're not going to actively seek it out because these people aren't really involved, right? Not a lot of sense in worrying about that. But there might be people that have a lot of power, but no interest, right? Well, they have a lot of power, so they could actually derail our project or they could help it, right? So we just need to keep them satisfied. Stay off the radar, right? Don't step on their toes. Don't go over budget, bleed into their funds or whatever. Don't mess with them. They won't mess with you. That's kind of the standpoint there. So we just keep them satisfied. Give them little status updates from time to time. If they request more information, provide them with whatever they want, but don't make them part of the regular communications because they're not going to need it.
All right.
Same thing kind of goes for people who are low power but high interest, right? We might have somebody that doesn't have a lot of power in the company, but this project is going to change their job, change the way that they do work. So they're going to have high interest. They really want to know what's going on, all right? So these people, we need to keep them informed.
Right.
And so we're going to send them every notification we can so that they have an idea of what's coming down the road. And if they do have feedback, they can provide it. But since they're low power, we're not necessarily going to act upon that. Now the danger zone, and you really color this red up here. The danger zone is up here in the top right. In this scenario, you've got people who are high power and high interest. They're really interested in the project, and they've got the power to help or hurt the project. So these guys, we need to manage them closely, right? Keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer. We need to make sure that we're giving them all the information they request, that we're listening to their feedback, that we're managing every aspect of communication with them to keep everything on the up and up and moving the project along. All right, so that's power and interest. For our project, let's do power and influence. Okay? So power, and I'm not going to do dots within a square because that doesn't really matter. What really matters is just that you have the people. My little text box kind of getting in the way there. All right, that you have the people kind of categorize what is going on with my. All right, well, we're going to listen to people. So we've got people like. We can just go down our stakeholder register, right? So we'll start here with me. So Don Pizzette. As far as influence. I carry a little bit of influence here, right? If somebody has an opinion and I have a differing opinion, I can convince people from time to time. And I have a decent amount of power because I do have purchasing power here. So I'm high kind of on both of these little charts here. So I'm just going to put Don Pizzette over here. All right. And then we've got, I was going to try and move that out of the way. What?
It's fighting you.
I know, it's apparently going to stay there forever. All right, so I'll leave it there. So then I've got, who else? We've got
Nathan.
Nate. All right, now Nate has power in the company. He is the producer. He's putting the shows on. But remember, this is in respect to the company as a whole, not necessarily this project, okay? Now, he has a lot of influence over the project because he's the originator, and I want to make him happy, So he is a high influence person, but he's not really a high power person as far as this project is concerned. He can't approve more funding. He can't approve more personnel on this side project. If this were a show, it would be a different story, right? A show, he's got high power on the show, so it'd be different. But for him, I'm going to put him over here under high influence but low power. So Nathan Copeland right here. All right. Then who else do we have? We've got Ronnie.
Yep.
Now, Ronnie, you are the assistant project manager, so you'll be making decisions on my behalf if I'm not here. You have that authority, right? And you're a fairly influential person too, so I'm going to stick you up here right along with me.
Okay.
All right. And then Rob. Now, Rob doesn't have a lot of power over this project, right? We're bringing him in as a subject matter expert. He's going to be doing some of the work, so he doesn't have a lot of power. He's on the low side. On the influence side, he's a carpenter. He was a carpenter. He's got expertise that we don't. He's going to be high influence. I'm going to say that if Rob tells me, hey, don't use that wood, use this other wood, it's better, I'm going to trust his judgment because I don't know. So we'll pop him over here. All right. Then we've got the IT Pro TV viewers. Now, the IT Pro TV viewers, you guys, our customers, it's kind of an interesting thing, right? You don't have power in the company in terms of, like, you're not our employee. You don't work for us. You don't have a title, but you're our customer, and you really, if you guys give us feedback, we act on that, right? So while you don't have power in the company, you'd be low power, you're actually going to be high influence. If you tell us to do something, we're gonna listen in most cases. So I'll put the IT Pro TV viewers there. All right. Now, obviously, as my stakeholder list grows, I'll have people kind of fall into different areas. But remember what they were suggesting in the PMI, in the manual there, was that each of these quadrants kind of corresponds to a different action. How do I handle these people? And I don't have anybody in the just monitor area, right? We could put like Jason, our director, right, who wouldn't have a lot of power as far as this project is concerned, and he wouldn't have a lot of influence in it because we don't respect him. But it's fun to make fun of people when they don't have a microphone. So you know, we could throw him in there if we wanted, but we don't really have anybody that falls in that scope. So we've got Don and Ronnie. We need to be managed closely. Well, we're the ones doing the managing, so not really anything to worry about there. And then these guys down here, we need to communicate with them, keep open channels, and try and keep them happy. You know, that's what the PMI is suggesting here. Keep informed, make sure that we're doing what they need. All right. So now, when we start to go and look at their influence, right? Here's where we're going to put things like manage closely, right? And Nathan was keep informed. Ronnie was manage closely. Rob was keep informed. And IT Pro TV viewers, keep informed. And we're going to use this information later in our communications plan, but for right now, just this is the influence that we've assigned to them. And these terms, you can use whatever terms you want, right? So you might want to assign them colors, like I've seen red, yellow, green, like a stop sign, where you have, here's people that are in the green, here's people that are in the yellow, and here's people that are in the red. And you set up your communications pattern based on that. The people in the red, those are the ones that you interact with regularly. People in the green, they're low risk, you kind of let them cruise. All right, so when we're done, what we've got is a I always want to say stockholder, a stakeholder analysis matrix, right? So now we've got the matrix, it's filled out. I do need to save this in my project, so I will save it. And we'll pop that in here. So again, this is going to go back to initiation, stakeholder analysis matrix, version 1.0.
Yeah, now this matrix for us is really important in terms of adding new stakeholders as well, right? As more stakeholders may come onto the project, we need to be able to place them where we need to and be able to know their influence and their power right away. And so maybe we can't actually understand it right away, but maybe by bringing this matrix up, it gives us that ability to kind of visualize it and then go, I know exactly where I need to actually keep them in line with the communications process here.
All right, so we've got that done. We've got our stakeholder register pretty much filled out now. I might need to come back and update some of this later on, but for the most part, we're there. Most everything's done. I did forget to talk about one thing. You know, I mentioned under classification how we were doing primary and secondary. I didn't mention any of the other types that are out there, and PMI actually calls out a few in the PMBOK. Where's my notes there? So if you go into the PMBOK, you'll find a few other ones. Some people choose to classify them based on whether they're internal or external. Internal meaning, are they your employees, or external, are they somebody outside? You know, if you're dealing with contractors and things, you have internal and external. You might also choose to break it down by supporter, neutral, or resistor. Supporter, somebody who wants to help your project succeed and you know, finish.
Right.
You have resistors, people who don't want your project to succeed. And you have neutral people, people who don't care either way. They're just there to get the project going. All right. And classifying them that way, again, is just kind of that meter sticks that you can use to measure this. Now, keep in mind, just like with the project charter, remember on the charter how I deleted several fields? I said, hey, these don't really apply to us, we'll drop them out. That's how the stakeholder register is too. At a minimum, you don't need all this information. At a minimum, you need name and role, right? Preferably name, role, and contact information, but name and role is really all you need. The person and what their role is within the project, so you can keep track of everybody who's attached to that project. If you don't get the contact information, that's going to be difficult, but really that's the minimum you need. So let's say, for example, that you're in a politically sensitive environment, right? You don't want to put somebody on here and throw their classification as resistor and put managed closely and all that stuff, because they're going to read that document and say, wait a minute, are you calling me a resistor? Who do you think you are? You know, and you can really ruffle some feathers, right? So in that type of an environment, you might say, you know what? It's not worth even tracking that. And so you might choose to ditch that particular column and just say, you know, I don't need that classification or whatever. So you may choose to knock some of these out. As with all this stuff, it's designed to be modular. You pick and choose the pieces you want. But like I said, at a minimum, you need their name and role. All right, so now that we've got that, we've got our stakeholder register. Let me just make sure I save that. We've got our stakeholder analysis matrix. And as we go through planning and we identify more people, we may have to come back and edit this. So this is a bit of a living document. It doesn't have lasting effect on our project as a whole, so we don't worry about that too much. We'll see other documents where that's not the case. But I think that pretty much knocks out anything else.
I think that's just about everything.
No, that does seem to be it. So those are the things that we need to keep in mind. Just to kind of review a few things. When we do the identification of people, we identify what they are and what their role is. We also do our assessment, and with the assessments, I was saying, you know, whether we need to manage them closely or you know, just monitor or whatever. You might also have other things like keeping track of what phase in the life cycle they have the most interest in. They might not have interest in the whole project. So like Rob, who's going to be building this cabinet for us, he might not care so much about initiation and closing and monitoring and analysis, but planning and execution, right? He's going to care about those. So I might want to get even that detailed and start to break that down. These are all different things that we can choose to do if necessary. All right, but otherwise that wraps up the stakeholder analysis, and really this wraps up the initiation phase, all right? Now, I want to talk about one last thing before we wrap up this show, which is there is a phase called closing. And the closing phase, a lot of us think of it in terms of closing the end of the project, and that's definitely true. But you can also use the closing phase at the end of every other phase. So we just closed, we just finished initiation. We may choose to implement closing right now, okay? And that doesn't mean shut the project down. It means by closing, we go and double check. Did all the work get done? Did all the documents get generated that should have been documented? And then we gather the documents and distribute them to the stakeholders and say, here's where we're at right now, we just finished initiation. So as a part of our project, let's see, here, as a part of our IT Pro TV Arcade Cabinet project, if I go in here and look, I have generated 4 documents. I generated a project charter, and I've got 2 copies because one is the original and the other one is signed. I've got that, so it's a PDF, you know, the one that's signed. I've got our stakeholder analysis that we did and our stakeholder register. Here's our project so far, right? These 4 documents, now we're ready to move into planning. All right. So when we get into the planning phase, we'll see that these serve as inputs, so we can't get into planning without doing these first. Now we're done. We're ready to move on. All right, well, this is a pretty good spot for us to stop right here. We're going to wrap up this show a little bit early because we're done with the phase and we're ready to move into the next phase. So let me just remind everybody, if you have any questions on what we've done, I know it's been pretty softball so far, so nothing really challenging. But if you have any questions, live during the show, you can go to itpro.tv/live. You'll see the chat box right beneath the video. Post your questions there. We monitor and answer during the show. If you have questions afterwards, make use of the Q&A forums. They're there for you. You click on the Q&A link at the top of every IT Pro TV page. It'll take you into the forum so you can post your questions. We monitor and answer. All right, well, I hope you guys enjoyed the show. Stay tuned because we're going to be coming back with the planning phase next. If you're watching live, it'll probably actually be tomorrow. So we'll jump into that, start tackling some of the cool things that are there, and we'll have some fun with it. So excitement down the road. All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, signing out for IT Pro TV, I'm Don Pizzette.
And I'm Ronnie Wong.
And we will see you next time.